What's up, everyone? Good evening, friends. It is good to see you. I see some of you are in the chat right now. Welcome to our Thursday night segment. Me and my boy, Jawanza. Hello. This is one of my best friends, Jawanza. And so tonight, we're going to get right into it, because I don't want to waste your time. And this is something that's been on my heart in regards to everything that's been happening in our nation, the death of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and many others over the years too. I think 2 weeks ago it just hit me heavy in the heart, and I originally wanted to kind of pivot away from senior night and just do this last Sunday, but I wanted to honor the seniors in their day. But I still want to have this conversation because this means a lot to me. This topic means a lot to me. I'm passionate about this topic, and I want you to hear it. I want you to kind of see our love. I want you to see our friendship, and hopefully, too, that we can start the conversation. We lean into these conversations. We don't run away from them. We lean in, and we ask questions like why and how come and what was that like for you. So that's what we're going to do tonight. At any point, if you have a question that you would like to ask me or Jawanza or both of us, go ahead and throw it in the chat. Just throw it up there. Be wise in your questions too. But, we'll try and answer them to the best of our ability. All right? So, I gave you the why we're doing this because it's important. But now I'm going to ask you, Jawanza, what made you say yes to doing this? Because I called him like last week, and I was like, yo, Jawanza, I have an idea. And he's like, uh-huh. And, you said yes to this, but I also knew that, like, that was a big ask of you to, like, come do this. Like, it's to open up your heart to this topic again for you. Like, I'm sure it's tough, too. But, yeah, go ahead and share with us kind of like why you said yes to this.
I felt like, first and foremost, it made sense because you're not just like bringing in some black guy and it's like, hey, I want to talk from this perspective and like I want you to inform my group about what black people do,
Yeah.
I think it was a lot more like, I've came here before, I've spoken to the youth. A lot of you guys might remember me when I came by,
Mm-hmm.
and I also was able to jump into a Zoom call early on in this whole quarantine fiasco. So I have some familiarity there. I feel like there's a commonality, there's a place we could touch base.
Right.
And my heart at the end of the day is just to serve God's body. If I feel like because of the commonality that we have, I'm not just going to jump in and just start talking at people because
Right.
we have some kind of touch base to go from. It makes sense for me to serve in this way.
Mm-hmm.
If there needs to be a voice to speak to a certain context, I would be glad to feel that if it makes sense. And I felt like this made a lot of sense.
Yeah, it made a lot of sense for me too. When I was thinking about this, like I wanted to do something to provide something for the students. You're the first one I thought of because we've had, tens, maybe even hundreds of like conversations around this stuff too. And so for those of you who don't know, real quick, just to give you a little context, like who's Jawanza? Jawanza and I met our freshman year of college at Cairn University, and that's where we really. Our friendship like flourished, it flowered, it just really bloomed, right? From totally different backgrounds, like legit, totally different ones. And then we just kind of like found the common ground of our love for Christ. And then we had a lot of other things in common too, right? But that's where we got to have a lot of fun together. But, roommate, groomsmen, just lots of conversations. We've stayed up many nights playing video games.
Good day. Good night.
Right. Many times, eating bowls of cereal, bags of chips or Doritos at a time, right? And just like, we'd have our silly moments for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We won't tell them the story about the baby powder because that's just reckless and
Though you
ridiculous.
need to hear that story one day.
But we've also had like a lot of serious conversations too, where
Mm-hmm.
you've lovingly like helped me through some of my like own ignorance or like just not even knowing things I was saying or thinking that was like questionable, and you lovingly like pushed me on that, right? You were like, well, how come you think that way, and this, and like, and us doing life together, me hearing your story and seeing your life together, just like was beautiful. And so I want to say just like thank you to you. I said it a lot, but like appreciate you and our friendship like crazy. And not just you two, like other friends like Nick and Rick and E, if you're watching. What's up, friends? But yeah, so just to give you some context, that's our relationship, our brotherhood. We really are like brothers, right? Would you say, add anything to that?
Yeah, I think you stretched as much as you would think me, I would think you. Like, this is not like an inferior culture or inferior background meeting another one, and from one side to the other, and vice versa.
Right.
This is two brothers who had the opportunity to grow and stretch each other's viewpoint on life because of how different we were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we met as equals, and that was huge for me because I never expect that, honestly. We're gonna get into that a little later, but I never expect, especially someone coming from a white culture, to come and like being alert, like, hey, I want to learn, I want to better understand.
Yeah.
And of course, like he was mentioning, the love for Christ was huge. Just seeing this man's passion for the Lord and seeing how much he really had a desire to honor him with his life, to worship him, and to do right by a representative as a Christian was something I just gravitated towards. So yeah.
Yep. Much love, so we say. Much love. All right. You ready to get into it a little bit?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
As we were just praying beforehand, just like we want to, like we just said, really just best serve you in some of these questions that we've both been like chewing on. So I want to do less talking. I'm just going to lob it up to you, alley-oop it up to you, man. So here we go. Question one I have for you, man, like with everything that's been going on, the wide vast of things that have been going on, like how are you processing things? You know, where's your mind at? Like where's your heart at with everything?
That's an interesting question because what I always tell people is this is, you know, George Floyd was not the first situation that this happened. For a lot of people, it was the wake up. Like it was a time for people to be like, whoa, like this is serious for many different layers of reasons. But for a lot of people who have been kind of in this narrative for a while, for a lot of black people who have known that there's been a lynching and a pointed murder of a lot of people who are unarmed, who did nothing wrong besides exist as a black person, we follow the narrative and understand that this is another sad truth that is continuing to be propagated and cyclical inside of this world. For me, what was my first time getting like thrown into the situation and really like having like a person's story put in front of the world was Mike Brown's story, and this is 2014, so this is 6 years ago.
Right.
And I may or may not like talk a bit about my experience with that later if it makes sense, but I more just want to talk about like this was just another time for me to experience trauma. It was a traumatic thing for me to see someone who was murdered by a police officer, caught on tape, and for that man to just be able to, in a really dark and demonic way, like know that nothing was going to happen to him, to commit the act, to not get up when he heard this man saying he couldn't breathe, calling out for his mother. When he saw these things happening, what he did was stay there, 8 minutes, 46 seconds, get up, get in his car.
Yeah.
The callousness of that is something that we've all experienced in the black community time and time again. So processing it is difficult because it's like, it's something you've always felt. It's an ache you've always had in your heart. But to have it happen again, to this extent, back to back to back, has different layers to it. To say it was painful is an understatement, but that's probably the best way I could explain it, by like couching it in a context of trauma and saying that it was painful.
Yeah, you said like it was traumatic for me. Can you unpack that a little bit? Like help us or help me or someone like me understand like how, you know, like, because I think sometimes too of like, I've heard like my friends, like you said, like I see me there, I see my future son there, my students there who are you're a youth pastor too. I think maybe for some people it might be hard to be like, I don't get that. Like why is that traumatic? I know that's like a right safety hat ignorant question and maybe a little bit too, but like I asked that to like help a little bit too, but like, yeah, can you expand upon that?
Absolutely. So you mentioned a bit, we had a conversation right before this where I was mentioning that you really, when you see the Ahmaud Arbery's, when you see the Breonna Taylors, when you see the George Floyds and the lists of people that this has happened to, caught on tape or not, there's a common union that we have in the black community. Not just because we're all black, but because we understand the deep work that it takes to be successful, to exist, to even be accepted in a community that is mostly whitewashed, and it's hard to sometimes even be counted as valuable, be counted as a valuable person because of the world that we're in, the world that's saturated with a beauty that isn't black. You're only beautiful if you look a certain way. You can only be accepted if you look a certain way, dress a certain way, have a certain name. From the time I was a little boy, and my name is Jawanza Finellis, they were like, you're not going to get a job with that. Like, we're in a world that only caters to people who look and who fit a certain paradigm. So we all have a shared understanding in the black community that we have to work super hard just to be accepted, just to be successful, just to have A, B, and C, because we are already working from being how many steps back, right? So when you're seeing someone at the fullest, that's at one of the worst, at the worst and fullest expressions of the prejudice, of the racism, and being murdered, and knowing that again nothing was going to happen to this man because he was a cop, because he was white, because black life in this country is less valuable, because that was the world we all live in. We've all had this context of we could be next. We don't know in what way, we don't know what day, we don't know what time, what hour, but we could be that next person under a knee, behind a gun,
Right.
being looked at and being pigeonholed as a certain story just because of the narrative of what's been black people up in America up until this point.
What's been the narrative? We're going totally off script, but I love it.
No, that's all right.
Because this is where I feel like the Holy Spirit is like leading me to ask you questions. So, all right, Lord, here we go. What's been the narrative?
So again, America is the acceptance. If you want to be in a certain pool of acceptance, if you want to get a leg up, you have to affiliate yourself in some way with whiteness. Anything that is inherently black, anything that is inherently non-white is put in an other pile. You're naturally put in this, you have to shave your beard, or you have to like cut your hair. Like even me as a black man having locks, it's like we're treated as weapons because there's a narrative that beauty, that acceptance only should look a certain way.
Right.
And even like this whole situation of like America being in like this tension of what it is has had me really look at my own life and having to think about my parents, who I'm Haitian American. I'm not African American. My parents separately came from Haiti, and my dad grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and moved to Woodbridge, and that's where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in the suburbs. And even from the time that I was young, my dad, through his experiences of, being a black man in America and facing discrimination, facing segregation, facing a lot of no, you can't, and fighting through it. I mean, I would never victimize black people to the point where it's like, oh, we can't do anything or we can't get anything. My dad was a business owner. He fought for that, and he got that in a really awesome way. But he had to teach me, don't you ever go anywhere without your ID. He gave me an ID. How young was I? My dad gave me an ID. Just to like, man, I can't even remember how old. I was somewhere around, I was like, I barely hit the double digits. And he like gave me like this knockoff little thing with my name on it, like where I live, just in case anything ever happened to me. So if anyone ever found my body, if a cop ever pulled me over or saw me walking home late one day and was questioning why this black guy was walking home in a nicer part of the town that we lived in, what he was doing. Because my dad was like, don't you ever get caught without an ID. You never, like, somebody would do something to you and no one ever think twice about it, because a black life isn't valued very highly. A black life isn't given isn't given equal attention as anyone else who would die. So, yeah, I'm gonna cut it there. There's like 3 different rabbit holes. I just had to stop my brain from going down. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, because like you said, love, like backing up a step for a second, like seeing the death of George Floyd, of you thinking, or like the fear, like the trauma comes from that could be me. And like that just like hit me just now. Like I've never had to think that or to fear that or to worry through that and deal with that emotion of thinking that.
It's a huge thing of psychosis, man.
Yeah.
It's a whole psychology because another thing my dad as a good black father did was like give me parameters of like, you yes sir cops. You never act up around cops. You always show them your hands. You again make sure you always have an ID on you. You always let them know where you're coming from, where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
If you're ever around someone, don't you act up because I'm not going to lose you over some nonsense.
Yeah.
And I mean historically, black lives have not mattered. It's been like, oh, someone else, like if you want to go through history, someone else like died on the slave field. Someone else was lynched. Someone else died in a factory. Someone else was not given proper housing, or someone else. And it's just like we just keep it moving. It's like in the American narrative, it's never been like, let's pause in light of this black life that wasn't being treated fairly or that wasn't being given attention. And it's something that, again, as a shared community, we're aware of, and that we've tried to band together in a way to protect one another, to speak out for one another, because we know that a lot of times no one is going to speak out for us.
Wanted to again touch on something that came to my mind too, because I want to speak to the heart of like this idea of like if I'm going to ask a fun question right now. You ready? If I feel for my friends, or like in my shoes, I can only speak from my perspective, right? But like in my shoes, I feel for my friends. I'm hurting with my friends. But I also come from a family heritage of cops. My grandpa was a police officer. My dad was a lieutenant in the city of Newburgh. My cousin's a police officer. My brother-in-law served in the military, different branches. So like, right, these two worlds of like, so I guess the question I'm forming around of asking is, if I'm empathetic or if I understand or feel for or care for or hurt with my friends that are black, does that automatically mean that I don't love, appreciate, respect cops?
That's good.
It's a fun question.
Super good question. I'm glad you even brought it up.
Yeah.
Because I was just kind of going and not thinking about how people could be interpreting my words. We don't generally do good. I can only speak for an American context because of my experience, but we don't do good with holding two truths at the same time. We don't do good with that, and a lot of times it's hard for us to live in tension because of that, and that's where tension is. Yeah. Tension is where like these two things are true at the same time, and how in the world like do I navigate life in light of these two things being true? And like it's true that I've had bad encounters with police officers, and it's true that I love your father.
Yeah.
Like, your father, that's my dude. We've had some difficult and dope conversations, me and your father.
Yeah.
Because again, it's about widening your experience. It's about becoming someone who's able to love your neighbor, someone who's able to say, just because you're saying something that isn't my experience, I'm not gonna say that you're wrong. I'm not gonna be like, you know what, you have no idea what you're talking about. What I'm gonna do is listen, because I'm not you. I haven't sat in your shoes, which is why many times I've thanked you for even having your context and being willing to have conversation, because what it helps me do is better understand someone who doesn't get it, better understand a context and a culture of people who would like to help, and a context and a culture who have not experienced this, and how your thinking process is. A lot of times in the black community, we're just ready to go. We're ready to fight, ready to change. You're with us or you're not with us. Like you help our cause or you don't. But we're not very good at stopping and being like, you know what? There are some things you have to also process through, and some things that is not gonna be okay. Like you're not gonna just be like, I get this overnight.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be more patient and better understanding with individuals who are curious and who really do want to be being a part of the answer, but are not just gonna get overnight after one conversation, after this dialogue. Yeah. We have to be better at sitting down and listening to each other. So I would say I'm not negating anything.
Right.
Antithesis. I don't think all police officers are terrible. I would never shame or not sit next to a cop. I think the beauty in it is finding commonality in people who might disagree with me, and saying, okay, where do we agree? Let's start off from that point. Where do we find commonplace, especially in the body of Christ? Right. Where do we find commonplace? Where do we agree? And then let's do life with each other from there. And I think the more we really start doing life with each other, I mean, you are a testament to this. we put our guards down, and it's less about your opinion versus my opinion, and it's less about, oh man, you think this way and my experience hasn't been that, so you're probably just saying that because you're victim blaming or you're whatever. Like, it becomes less of a mud show, and it becomes far more of what the church is supposed to look like. People who are different under the same umbrella of Jesus, expanding each other's filters, right? Expanding each other's understanding of the world, because no one has it all right. I don't care where you grew up. I don't care what context or background you're coming from. You do not have a full understanding of the world.
Right.
And one of the reasons why God put us around different people, have us had access to different people, is so that we can stretch each other's psychology, our context, and our imagination for what the world is and what it could be.
Whew. Man. Yeah, I think just thinking back of like through college, the first time I brought you home, because I was like, yo, my parents, you got to meet my roommate.
It's not your girlfriend. I met his parents, yo.
Right, first time bringing just to meet my parents is because I was like, this is my dude. Like, that was such a fun experience, I think, for both of us, right? Like, looking back, we both like walked away like on the car drive home, and we were both like, so what's that like for you, man? You know, like just, and we both had different like beautiful moments of seeing each other, seeing how my parents loved on you, seeing how you loved my parents.
Yeah.
The questions I remember one night you were like, Mike, you leaving your front door open? And I was like, yes, we're good. And you were like, ooh, huh? And can you tell, because you'll say it better than I can, but tell them that.
Oh my goodness. My boy left his door wide open. It's nighttime. We're going to sleep. His door is all, I'm like, I started getting anxiety because, you know, where I'm from, that's an open invitation for someone to come in and take everything you have and maybe even like your life. And he's just like, no, we're good. I'm like, I get like, you feel good, like but like, what if someone just walked, like, there's the screen open away, like, and then access to everything. But he wasn't raised that way.
Yeah.
What am I going to say? Oh, you're dumb? It's not his context, you know, like, so it was a deep learning moment for me, even like chopping wood with you guys. You taught me how to drive stick that weekend. You showed me like your furnace in your basement, stuff that I've never been introduced to. And I could sit here and be like, oh, well, you know, that's weird, and push you to the side. Or I could take a seat and pull out my notebook, you know, which is, I'm glad I did, because that was an experience. That was an experience.
Yeah. All right, so this next question I have is like changing gears a little bit, but I want to kind of like speak life into this, give some context to this. 'Cause I feel like there's also a lot of hate and misunderstanding in this phrase that people have been throwing around like crazy to attack each other on social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Like, I think that's also been breaking my heart, is seeing so many people like divided and just hating on each other. And I'm just like, man. But like this idea of like white privilege, that phrase, the privilege that white people have, whether they know it or not. Let's talk about that. You know, let's give some context and understanding for it, because maybe the people who are listening might want to tune out. Don't, because there's truth in what I want to say and what's in my heart to say about this. But also too, like, I think this is why we're doing this, is because this is uncomfortable, even for me to like talk through, admit through. I know it's uncomfortable for you, maybe to like vulnerable to be sharing your story with us too. Or people watching too might feel uncomfortable that we're not afraid of saying these things or talking to these things. But like this idea of white privilege, help me understand.
That is a super large topic, and I think the best way to start the conversation is to like say what it's not. Like, I think a lot of people, when they say white privilege, people who are white hear it and say, like, are you saying I worked for nothing that I got? Are you saying that like everything that I own was like handed down to me by a silver spoon? Like, there's work ethic there. Of course, like I would never like, anytime anyone got a house, like houses are expensive. Like things are hard to acquire. You have to go to college in a lot of scenarios if you want a career. Those things, like, you've definitely had to go through certain levels of hardship in order to acquire those things.
Right.
But the privilege of it from a white person to a black person is the boundaries that have been put in place of black people that have not been put in the place of white people. For example, I mean, people don't like when people bring up slavery, but here we are. Slavery was an economic system that benefited only the people who were put slavery in place, only white people, not the black people who are actually doing the work, right? And when, in light of like slavery being ended, right? They're like, okay, we're gonna do away with this Emancipation Proclamation, boom, that's done. All the white people still privileged from or still benefited from all the economics, and black people, just like, all right, figure it out, and like they deuced out. It was supposed to be, there were supposed to be reparations, there was supposed to be a certain amount of money given, a certain amount of land, a mule, that whole thing that's kind of ancient to us, like a mule, how are you doing a mule? But those things were like economic benefits for people back then. And without a lot of those things, you naturally set people back to do a lot of things themselves.
Yeah, right.
And on top of that, on top of like saying no, you have less quality schools, right? Less quality jobs. You barely get paid at all for the jobs that you're now working now that slavery is over. If you even get accepted, if you even get a job acceptance,
right.
you're
talking like 100 years ago. Is that
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
And then people want to say, well, that was like so long ago, but the reality of it is, a lot of that went into our psychology. So when slavery ended, segregation didn't. When slavery ended, a lot of people doing preferential treatment still did what they wanted to do. And when there was any kind of benefit, any kind of gain by the black community, like you could look up places like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, where there was a beautiful community of people who actually worked for what they got, and they beautifully benefited and had their own businesses and had a whole community just black owned, and it was put on fire and bombed by the white community. And again, people just kind of dusted their hands and walked away. And then, of course, like Jim Crow laws were put into place, which was separate but equal, but it was far from the case. You have people who had to fight for something equal rights like voting and being able to sit in a certain seat that they wanted to sit in when they were tired and getting off of work. There are levels to how much benefit that there has been, and even today we're like, well, what does that have to do with what we're dealing with today? Okay, well, if I told you that it's less applicable to me because my father just came from Haiti, but if I told you my grandfather experienced that, and he had nothing to give over to my father, and nothing to give over, and my father had very little to give over to me, where in turn, someone who didn't have all those boundaries and barriers into getting their economic gain, they had great schooling, they had great workplaces.
Right. They were set up well.
They were able to get set up well. They're able to jump straight into like a career without having to worry about like, am I good? Is this okay? Can I do this? Can I do that? They knew all of the right language because it was their culture.
Yeah.
They were able to, that's the privilege that we're speaking about.
Right.
And it's a curse word in some areas, but if you want to be honest about how history has unraveled and where we are today, we have to address it. I remember having a conversation with somebody in college about this, and it got so heated. The room got so thick. Because she thought that at the time I was saying that there was like no work ethic there, like
Right.
whatever. And she was like, what if I said that you guys are privileged because you get to walk around urban neighborhoods without worrying about your life? And she didn't realize how much privilege was in that comment that she stated, saying that I had privilege. So you're saying in my community, like on any given, on a certain blocks, you can have
Right.
prostitution, drug activity, gang activity, liquor stores everywhere. And that's a privilege for me to walk around and experience my people like in a degraded state. That's a privilege for you. It's nice. Like I smile walking outside and seeing like a lady hunched over because she's done so many drugs that she can't stand up straight. Like that's a privilege, right?
Wow.
It's just very odd when we start having because we just have to be honest about our history. And I'm not putting the guilt on anyone or the shame on anyone. It's just the reality that we live in.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll leave it there.
we could talk just an hour and a half on that.
Yeah.
So, and I think my 2 cents of it too, of like feeling it, and I said this in the video I posted a week ago, of like not having to worry or think through or calculate what I'm gonna say or do, or like really having the worry or anxiety of how I act or how I look will affect how other people view me. Like not really having to grow up that way, not really having to like even do ministry this way. Like I think that for me, it would like kind of smacked me in the face, going like that to me was like a definition I could wrap my head around of like the privilege of like not having to worry or stress or fear or like wake up or if I'm pulled over, things like that too. I don't have those thoughts don't go through my mind that they might you. All right, this is so much fun. I love that we're doing this. Unpack for us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about Jawanza's story. You know, I've heard your story a lot. Our students heard like snippet of it when you came to visit, but you know what you feel on your heart to share with us, so you can help us, help me, help the white people watching or whatever, like the students watching, the parents watching, the families watching, the pastors that maybe be checking this out later, to understand your context too, right? Like let's develop my frame of reference that you talked about, my filter. Develop it for me. Develop it. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what was it like growing up a black man for Jawanza?
So my context, I now live in Elizabeth, and I've lived here for somewhere between 6 and 8 years. I keep forgetting to do the math, and I need to, so I can give a correct answer every time someone asks me. But which is an urban neighborhood, mostly minority, Hispanic and black. But I grew up in Woodbridge, and that was a really interesting experience because you see racial interactions and racial differences, racial kind of like question marks. You see a lot of that more because I'm everywhere. It's everywhere. I was one of 5 black people in my neighborhood. My neighborhood was big. It was big. And I was one of 5 in the whole little like cut that we lived in. So automatically when I moved in, there was like, okay, you know, there's a family that moved in. And we didn't really get like talked to by anybody, but I didn't think too much about it. Yeah. And so, but then I started going to schools, and then like the question marks come up. I made some great friends. Like I made a great amount of like connections there, but I always felt like who I naturally was had to have makeup on me, you know, because if I walked in, you know, and I had like certain clothes on, if I said a certain thing, if I like, you know, came in with what I felt like was authentically Haitian black me, I would get too many question marks, and I'd have to have too many conversations with people. So I always felt like I was like auto-correcting myself to fit this world, to fit this dynamic that wasn't natural for me when I went back home. And then you start just seeing like, because culture is, what all that culture is experience that turned into values, that turned into behavior. So I had that, but then I felt like I had to understand this new world that I was in, or this like public world that I had to like, again, autocorrect myself for. And that expressed itself in a couple different ways. Bad interactions with some teachers. Get a lot of like microaggression, which is like times people say like passive aggressive comments about your skin color, like the whole like monkey thing would come up, or like, hey, yo, that's what you guys talk like, right? Like that happened a whole lot. And you're just getting pigeonholed for the color of your skin. Right. And that honestly, a lot of that has to do with what people see on TV, like rap videos, or what people show about black expression. So they just kind of like, oh, that's all black people, right? Because they don't have a context for it. They don't have a filter for it. But I was far more than that. But I didn't want to stick out, right? I just did my best to stay in line, as hard as that could have been sometimes. I just wanted to like do what I had to do to get through this. You know, I didn't want to like stick my nose up too much. I didn't want to act whatever. Like I was just me. I just wanted to kind of be like a generic person. Like let me, as much as I can, blend into this world. But because so much of who I was always questioned, and my name and like was laughed like Jawanza, it was like all of that was, I had so much questions that I started to question myself. Like I remember at one point I created a whole identity for myself. I was like, my name isn't Jawanza, I'm Jason. Like I'm a white person.
That was 2 years ago, right? No, I'm just kidding. How old are you when you did that?
Man, I couldn't even. A lot of this bleeds together. I was somewhere between 8 and 12. Okay. I was younger for sure. Okay. But because I wasn't accepted, I always thought to myself, well, if I could have been white, if I could be what all these people do accept, then my life would be a lot better. My life would be had a lot more quality to it, and I wouldn't have to like always explain like my identity, or I felt like I had to justify who I was, or hide who I was, and just be quiet about certain things. So growing up, that was heavily my cultural experience. It wasn't all of my experience, again, I had some beautiful memories with with a lot of people, a lot of them white.
Yeah.
We got through some things, and then we became friends.
Mm-hmm.
I had a pretty cool childhood. That's not like generally, but culturally, that's how I felt, like
Right.
24/7.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. Uh, let's talk about the gospel for a moment.
Hey.
Let's talk about Jesus
Mm-hmm.
and what he stood for. Because this story that I've been reading, like Luke 10, over and over and over again, the story of the Good Samaritan and the context around that story for
Mhm.
me.
Break it down, Pastor.
It was like when Jesus spoke to the teacher of the law, the I guess professional of the law, for lack of a better term, in Luke 10, and he said, what's the ultimate law? How does one get to heaven? And then Jesus replies, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And this guy who knew the law, who knew everything, he asked it, trying to like get out of it because he knew what Jesus was saying, but he was trying to like squeak out. And you go, well, who is your neighbor? And Jesus didn't give a straight answer, but he answers with the story of the Samaritan. Like, he knew what he was asking when he was asking, but Lord, who is your neighbor? Because in that context, and you know this too, right? In that context, frustrates me, of the world of that time, Jewish people, like there was hatred between like Samaritans and Jew, like that. You don't go in that neighborhood. You don't go over that line. You walk around it. You avoid it. You walk the other side of the street. Sounds familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you want to buy a house where? No, don't go there. Well, why not? And Jesus uses that as the example. And then he goes, and after the story of the Samaritan, he asked the guy who teaches the law, so who was the one that best emulated a neighbor? And he says, the one who showed mercy. And that story, especially in the context of what's going on the past 2 weeks, has just like floored me and humbled me and like broke me, right? Of going like, even me asking the questions too, of asking myself, my own heart, have I tried to squeak out of avoiding this? And I don't like asking myself these questions, but that's what I've been asking myself. Where are you at with this? Like with Jesus, what he stood for, with the gospel overarching theme. I'm asking you a big question right now, brother. And what do you want to speak to on that?
Like, what always amazes me about Jesus is that we always like saying, like, as Hebrews tells us, that Jesus is not the kind of high priest that can't connect with us because of our pain.
Yeah.
What always amazes me about Jesus is there's always a way for us to connect him to something that's happening, to a narrative of the world. And Jesus was innocently arrested, falsely accused. He was beaten. He was hung, and on a tree, which is interesting. And he was killed innocently for something he didn't do. Now, if that doesn't like ring so many bells to the things that happen today, I don't know what does. The centrality of the gospel is an innocent man was publicly murdered for something he didn't do. And now a lot of what we're seeing is innocent men and women being publicly murdered and then being put publicly out there for everyone to see. And there being, all of this conversation around it afterwards, just like there was with Jesus, like, oh, he was this, he was that, let's take his clothes, let's stab his side, let's do this. Like, there's all of this conversation around who Jesus was, which killed him innocently. And he can relate to a lot of the damage that's going on. He can relate to a lot of the people who were innocently murdered. What I think for me is like the linchpin for like culture and race, because there's so many different places in the word, like Ruth being a Moabite, and there being so many like there being hatred between Israel and Moabites, but her being like redeemed and put inside of the fold of Israel, and there being so many like racial conversations inside of the Bible. The Bible is not afraid to have racial conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spoiler
Spoiler alert.
in Revelations, what I find fascinating is that not exactly that beauty, because we could talk about the beauty of there being every tribe, right? Every tongue.
Every tribe, every tongue.
But what fascinates me is, why was that important to be detailed?
Mm-hmm.
Why was that so important that John thought it was, okay, like, I'm going to articulate that I see people of different skin colors. I see people who are from different places in the same place doing one thing that they were created to do.
Mm.
And it fascinates me because I'm going to be black in heaven. Like, my skin color is not going to be removed.
Yeah.
And that like brings me to tears because
Huh.
God, like the deepest part of who I am is I believe I'm a Christian, right?
Yeah.
I'm a Christian at the heart of hearts of who I am. I don't identify as like being a black Christian, you know, whatever. But God he wanted to so tell a story with ethnicities, and then creating us to be all these different hues and have different stories and come from different backgrounds, that he's not going to wash that and have us be converted to a whole new race or something when we get to heaven. We're going to be still exactly what we were. And how do I officially know that aside from that verse, right? When Jesus came in his glorified body, no one knows, like, who is this like random, this dude is like purple, and why is he walking around next to me? Like, is he about to like, it took them a while to recognize him because the glorified body has an aspect to it that we can't fully understand that makes it hard, that made Jesus hard to recognize at the time, but he was still ethnically Jewish. And you're going to be white, and I'm going to be black, and that's not going to separate us when we're worshiping
I think it's
God.
going to surprise a lot of people when they get to heaven.
Yeah, I hope it does. I hope it does.
Thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure, I know I've spoken to a lot of you students over the past couple of weeks too, whether it was just through our conversation on the phone or even through our Bible study of like, I know a lot of students are feeling this too. You know, a wide spectrum of how they're feeling it. But for the students who are like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I almost feel like paralyzed. I felt that from a lot of students where they felt like they had to post something because if I don't, then I'm gonna be like condemned on social media.
Right.
I guess like, and this is like in love, like what would you tell the typical white student tuning in tonight or as they watch it later? What can they do in this moment? Like what practically, what tangibly in this moment can they do?
I think that's interesting for this context. My answer wouldn't exactly change, but it would be a bit more nuanced, maybe a little bit more layered, depending on like who I'm speaking to. I'm guessing that I'm speaking to youth who are in high school, maybe about to graduate high school or in middle school, who live with their parents, live under the rule of their parents, who may or may not have jobs, maybe most don't. So I want to be sensitive. Like all of that comes with its own array of, background that I think, and thinking of this question, I have to consider. But I think that the easiest thing and the most simple thing to do is to inform yourself. If you're like in a place where you're genuinely like, I just don't get it, and I need resource, I need to understand what's happening. Like I want more context, more filter, the word that we've been using. I would highly recommend. You might have mentioned this on your Instagram. I can't remember. I would recommend a Netflix documentary called 13th, 13th, that essentially connects slavery to the prison system and incarceration and how unjust policing can be at times. There's like, there's that is going to open your mind up to a lot of reality and a lot of fact and a lot of content. There's a lot of like awesome books. I would probably start with, there's one that I'm going through right now called White Awake by a man named Daniel Hill. He's a white man who had a really interesting experience at one of his friend's weddings one day, and his friend essentially told him like, you don't like, because he's like, I love your culture, I don't have culture. And the Indian guy was like, you have culture, it's just, you're just so saturated in it, you don't see how much you're in it and how much it benefits you all the time. And that led him down a journey to really properly understand what was going on.
Right.
So I'd probably start there. I could probably just like, but again, I want to be sensitive to the fact that some of them might not have that financial luxury.
Yeah.
Might not even be like that interested to jump into that field. And also, might not just, you're young, so you you don't have like all the ability to like just jump around and do all these different things.
Yeah.
So I think those two are great starting points, especially the Netflix documentary, because who doesn't have access to Netflix, whether it's your own or borrowed one?
What's Netflix? What? Netflix what?
Netflix.
What's that?
What you mean?
I'm just kidding.
So
Yeah.
everybody has access to that. So I would say start there tonight, and get prepared, because that'll really that'll mess you up a little bit, because it's going to talk about.
I had
things
to
that aren't
break.
normal.
I watched that like last week, and I had to like break it up into 2 nights because it was hard.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't like watching it, but I was like, nope, I'm gonna watch it. But like, I was like, I need a break.
Yeah. And I would love to. I mean, if anyone like ever reaches out to you, I would love to provide more resource. What I don't want to do is be like, hey, this is what you need to do, man. Because I think there's too much of that happening. You know,
Right.
there's far too much like, oh, you don't get it? You're one of them. Like, and it's like, I feel like even hearing your heart about certain kids who are like, who felt like anxiety, and it's like, they weren't even aware like this might have been this large of an issue.
Yeah.
And now they're being pressured, like, and their fingers are pointing at them, and all this stuff is happening. I think there's enough pressure in life, like, to not feel like I want to add more to people, but I would definitely say your number one responsibility should be to be a commitment to getting informed.
Yeah, other things that come to my mind too is like Liv and I just watched last weekend, Just Mercy,
Which is free right now.
and which is free, right? And I highly recommend you watching that. Olivia and I cried, like it brought us to tears. We were angry. We had to like push pause and go, play, and then a couple minutes later, just like bring us to tears, and like that was beautiful for us to do together, watch it together, like as a married couple, right? To like, for our hearts were breaking together as we were watching it. And so maybe students, maybe you like call up a couple friends, watch a movie as a family, watch a movie or two, or like, I think even if that's too much, starting conversations like these, leaning into, I've said it so much this past 2 weeks, and so you can be like, Mike, stop saying that. But like leaning in to these conversations, leaning in. Students, parents, if you're listening to, I'm sure you're curious of what we're talking about right now. Lean in to these conversations with humility and grace, and patience, right? Of like, that's kind of what I would say recommend to do. Like students who don't know what to do, you can, hey, you can even say, hey, mom and dad, or hey, friend, watch this. It's going to be on here later. You can tell them to watch this to help start cultivate that conversation, or the culture of cultivating conversations like this, right? Leaning into it.
A lot of time we had this conversation, like even when you don't speak, that speaks. When you're quiet about a certain topic, and you're quiet about the disparity that America has created and the difference in realities between whites and minorities, like that does damage. So it perpetuates concepts and creates like it reinforces certain thoughts and perpetuates concepts that people think where like everyone's fine. There's no difference between like what I have access to, what you have access to. It's figured out. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, bro. What are you doing? Like it'll be hard for you to understand the different levels of barriers and even like social constructs that are created to keep people down. If we don't have just something as simple as a conversation. It doesn't stop there, and I think there's like so much, if I could even plug in some websites, there's so much opportunities to get informed about like what's going on activism wise. Like there's so much, like there's for George Floyd, the website that you can go on there for, and just to kind of plug in to see what's happening policy wise, because there are people who are trying to change policy in light of what's happened, so that anyone who uses any kind of like hold like that again, they're automatically, like there's not even a conversation or an uproar, like you're automatically put in jail. Like there are certain conversations that need to be had, certain petitions that need to be signed. So there's a website called justiceforbigfloyd.com where you can look at all of that information. For Breonna Taylor is standwithbree.com. Is for Ahmaud Arbery, just these three, which are the freshest, but not the newest, not the oldest, not the most, there are so many other narratives and stories out there.
Yeah.
But Ahmaud Arbery, there is runwithahmaud.com.
Okay.
So those are as well 3 websites that you can get plugged into for those who who are prepared to say, you know what, I'm willing to acknowledge that there's something wrong, and I want to be part of the solution. Those 3 websites will give you action steps as far as not just to feel bad, not just to say, tweet something and like keep it pushing in your own world, but to actually make a change and a difference in this world.
Yeah, I had a thought and I forgot it, but for students who maybe are like, just to quickly touch on this because we're probably running out of time, but
Your word.
of like maybe they do feel really guilty one way or the other. How should students maybe like wrap their minds around this too? Of like, don't just feel guilty of doing like one sex and then whoop, I'm good now, but also or the guilt of, well, I don't feel as hard about this as maybe Mike does or my friends do. Like, I don't feel it. So
I would say to pray for God to remove a stony heart, because I think if anyone could look at the video of George Floyd's lynching, execution, murder, however you want to say it, and not feel like something needs to change and I need to make a difference, I need to take some kind of steps for this world to not function like this, there's a problem. Because what the other side of it is, what's been so hard about having some of these conversations with certain people is when you bring it up, they're like, oh, something must have happened. That's the immediate like defense of, or victim blaming, like, this person had to have done something in order to deserve death.
Yeah.
As Christians, death should never just be another thing that happens in the world. We should never be able to see a grieving family, to see a person who was murdered without a weapon over a bad check in a store, not even for anything legitimate. We shouldn't be able to look at things like that and just turn the other cheek, to switch our shoulder around and keep it moving. Something inside of us should be touched, and if it's not, I would desperately ask you to pray, because skin color aside, the death of an innocent person should move us. That should cause us to want to do something and to speak out, to make some kind of change, to be a part of the solution. And if we're so caught in what our day-to-day is, I would vehemently ask you to pray.
Right.
I'd vehemently ask you to just ask God to change your heart.
Yeah.
And you had a second part to that question that I forgot.
It's okay. It's okay, because I remembered, because what you said sparked what I thought of too before. I love what Pastor John, our pastor here at Mendham Hills, has been like pushing our families towards, and I've like echoed it to our students. Like, we as one big Mendham Hills family, I've been like going after the heart of things, going after, it's the heart that defiles us, not what we do on the outside. When people say, look, like on the outside, everyone was worrying about in the time of Jesus, and Jesus goes, no, it's you need to focus on what's on your inside, what's going on inside of your heart. That is what defiles you. And so I would say like too, of like, it's not just a law doesn't change a heart. Right? A changed law doesn't change a heart. Doesn't mean we don't do anything or push for anything, but also going like looking at, first you got to start with yourself. Take a good hard look in the mirror of going, what's inside my heart, and starting there too.
Yeah.
As we wrap up a couple things, do you have any questions for me?
Can you explain for anyone watching what it's been like for you to process with me, to process just generally with some of your friends as well, some of our other camp friends? What has it been like for you?
Woo. What's it been like for me? Well, I think people who know me would know that I'm a feeler. And to process all of this has been very complicated. It's been complex. On one side of it, like, because I'll be honest with you, right? Like, my initial thing about hearing about George Floyd, like, I didn't want to watch it. I didn't even want to acknowledge that happened. I was just like, no, I didn't want to watch it. But then like watching it through, like it just made my heart really heavy. I think my wife could tell you too, like I would go on a couple of rants about it a couple of times and just trying to wrap my mind around how to pastor through this, how to set an example for my students through this. My brain's been all over the place. My brain's been like, who's to say anyone wants to hear what I have to say, right? That was what I was thinking before I posted that video. Like, that's quite narcissistic of me to think that everyone wants to listen to me. But just wanted to share my heart of going, hey, like, my heart's been heavy about it. Yeah, my heart's been heavy about it. It's been, because I know you, we've cried together, we've gone through, breakups of our, of girlfriends, like, and then we stood by each other's side when we got married to our beautiful wives who are here in the room with us, like, we did life together. So for me to not feel it with you was like impossible for me.
Yeah.
On whatever degree I could feel it for, because I said before, like, I'll never fully
Right.
understand, right? But to the degree that I could, I was like, my heart was heavy for it. And also just like, again, like frustrated as seeing all my friends and families and people I didn't even know on Facebook, whatever, just become even more polarized over this stuff too. It's just been like, man, Lord help us, right? Like,
Have you chosen to engage with anybody who's like thought differently from you in this case?
that's a fun question. Not through social media. I have not. I purposely, I purposely, right? Like, I don't think that that's really the place, for me personally, my opinion, not the place to disagree so hard against, because they can't hear my voice, hear my tone, hear my heart. So to that aside, I would say not directly yet, because I also don't think like I've had enough conversation. I don't like call someone up, hey, I know you disagree with me, so let's talk. I haven't done that yet. No, I haven't. I'm waiting to like lean into those conversations when someone might say something out of love, going, hey, tell me about that. What'd you think about that? That's what more of like the opportunity. I think the Lord will, by His providence, set me up for that type of conversation to happen eventually. But I've been having awesome conversations with me and Olivia, with her family, my family, really good conversations through it. So
It starts in the house.
yeah,
I think people, what is an awesome quote that I feel like I live by is, whenever you're looking at any kind of issue in this world, it was created by people and it can be solved by people. And that sounds like real blanket statement, cute. Let's all hug each other, huggy bears. But it starts somewhere, and I think it has to start in our own households where some of this hasn't been talked about, which started the problem in a lot of cases. So I would applaud that and encourage all your kids to do the same.
Yeah. Last question, and then we'll pray and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, man.
Is there anything, last thing that you the last nugget of our Jawanza truth that you'd like to bestow on us as students, even me or anyone listening to? I want to offer the last word to you.
Part of it is a reinforcement, or echo of what I said before. But we're sitting here not as one person speaking into a more valuable culture on either end,
Right.
but as equals. And I think until we're going to have issues like this until we accept like the image of God as a real thing, and seeing a life lost, a life stifled, a life marginalized, being an injustice, not just in general to the quality and the value of a person, but an injustice in the eyes of God. This isn't like just like a person like pouring their heart out over like a sob story through their lives and how things were tough. Compared to a lot of my friends or people that I've heard stories of, I have a super light story, super light. But until we start viewing our stories as equally valuable and seeing the true image of God inside of one another, even Christian or not, we're going to continue to have these issues. So I would say that we should start with prayer That if our hearts are, like the question you mentioned earlier, if our hearts are in any way imbalanced or not seeing that, it's not connecting, like, hey, I just don't feel, I would applaud you for your honesty. And I would strongly encourage you towards prayer and ask God to replace your heart. I've seen it done. It's not just something that I'm speaking of in theory. I've had many people that I've had hard encounters with, some in college, aside from Mike, racially, where it's just like, they just didn't get it. They just didn't get generally like some of the cultural clashes that we were having and some of the things that I found valuable that they didn't. And by the end of our relationship in college, things blossomed in an awesome way. So I would strongly consider prayer.
Jawanza, I appreciate you taking time, driving over here from your neck of the woods to be here with me.
For sure, it was a pleasure.
So just want to say thank you, man. You constantly have taught me so many things, how to be a better husband, for one. Olivia, the reasons why some of the things I do, it's because of this man right here. All the good, all the bad's me, all the good's him. But just want to say thank you, man. I love you like crazy, dude.
Love you, man.
So let's
Enjoy.
pray.
Yeah.
I'm pray.
Yeah.
Father God, I want to say thank you for this moment right here, right now. And Lord, as I ask for the vision for what to come next, I ask for the discernment, the wisdom on what to do next. I pray for all the students and the families, the parents, everyone listening right now, that you would speak to them in a way that maybe they haven't before. Maybe that this conversation sparks others that they're going to have. And you would speak life into this conversation, and that we as a people, that we as a body of believers, that we as Jesus followers would lean into these conversations and stop leaning away from these conversations. Lord, I pray for that renewal, that revival. Maybe it's through the students. Let it be through the students, Jesus. Lord, we just want to say we love you, and we're humbled, and we bow at your feet. Everything that's going on, whether we agree or disagree, angry, upset, hurting, Lord, we just lay it all at the cross.
Yeah.
All of us together, we lay it all at the cross, where you died for all of this. That's part of the reason. So we lay it at your feet, Jesus. We love you and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, friends. Hope you have a great night. Thank you for being here, and let this be the spark of more conversations. We love you. Peace out.